Okay, I'm Wolfgang Baer, and I'm really happy to follow your presentation because you told a lot of things that I don't have to talk about, so this is a nice segue. And my topic is actually shown at the top here. I have developed a metaphysics or a physics of consciousness. I'm not talking metaphor, I'm talking reality here. Physical, scientific reality, and once it's accepted, there are a great number of psychological implications, of which I've picked one, which is the feeling of oneness, and I'm calling it an illusion, but that does not mean it is not real. Feelings are real, but the way it's used a lot in our world, and even in this conference, I believe, is incorrect, and I'm trying to straighten that out. So let's get started. That works? Yeah. Okay, the old objective worldview, which is what most of us are used to, and most of us actually work in, looks like this. And I have a pointer here. So what we're talking about here is that the world is represented, so people think this is real in a cartoon. When you see this on Sunday morning, you'll see this. This is real, right? It's a real physical world. It has objects in it. Some of them think, and we draw little thought bubbles in here to represent that we believe that something is thinking and has some feelings in it. But we get to a dualistic worldview which says, well, wait a minute, that feeling out there is not in the real world. You know, it is somewhere outside, and it's possibly a parallel real world of some kind, but it doesn't necessarily have much an effect. This is another kind of result of the materialistic viewpoint. But many of us, and I think you would agree, is that not only is the physical world generating those sensations, but to some extent the sensations must have some kind of an effect on the basic world again. Okay, so that leaves you with an interactive dualism, where there is a cycle between cause and effect cycle between real objects, mental sensations that in turn re-affect the real objects. So now comes the one thing that I want to say and show you, which is that, again, a lot of this is based on Whitehead's philosophy and so on and so forth, that actually what happens is that the sensations come first. You look out, you see me, you hear a sensation, a qualia. Okay? The next thing that happens is that those sensations are processed into, and this is the key point, they're processed into a model. This thing that you see represented on Sunday mornings all the time, this thing that you take for reality is your personal, internal model of the real world. And I've got to be very careful about saying what is the real world, because you don't know. No one knows. All you do is accept sensations that come from the outside. You process them into something which we call the model of the real world, but it is actually an accommodation of your internal structure to influences from the outside. That accommodation is in terms of a vocabulary of objects that you see around you. In other words, you're seeing this guy, you're hearing this guy, you're hearing qualia and all this stuff, right? That is your interpretation of the influences that not this guy here, not this sensation here, this is somewhere else out there is influencing you. You're accepting that influence and interpreting it within yourself in the vocabulary of objects, which is how you've grown up and learned how to do it, because you happen to be a human animal and you probably have a structure that's very similar to mine. All right, so there it is, the model. It's a model. Once that model is updated based on the explanation of the universe, you access it to generate predictions of the next sensations, okay? And if those predictions match what's outside, you feel comfortable. That's what you're doing right now. I think all of you are pretty comfortable, right? When they don't match, for example, if the sensation of your eyes does not match the sensations of your semicircular canals, you feel dizzy. If they don't match in some other way, you feel ambiguities, such as when you're seeing that, that vase that looks like a vase and sometimes it looks like two people. Your mind has ambiguities. You can't quite close this logical cycle, right? So what I'm saying now, and what I'm proposing, is that it's an event. This thing is an event. Sensations to explanations to prediction is an event. It's an event cycle. And that is what you are. You are a process. The consciousness is included in the cycle. And the world should be now conceived as an event. My colleagues in physics are wrong. It is not elementary particles. It is elementary events that we should be working with. And that's not, I'm not trying to explain everything. All I'm trying to do is make one little step in the process and evolution of science, because right now, science, the way it's implemented in our society, is in fact leading us down the wrong path. We need a slight, not a big thing, just a slight change. And the change is going to be objects, no, events, yes. All right? So, now, there isn't just one cycle, there isn't just one event, right? It's not just Sloopy here that sees Birdie. Birdie also sees Sloopy, right? So there's at least two of them, these cycles going on. And that's not the whole story, all right? There's the rest of the universe, right down here. So the rest of the universe, including you, who've been sitting out there looking at Birdie and Sloopy out there, are also in it. You're part of that rest of the universe. So there are at least now 3 cycles, and there are a whole bunch of them. But you notice that I kept the green line because that is the differentiation between what we call the objective world, or the objective visualization of our ideas or theories of what explains our sensations, and our sensations. So you got qualia here described in observational terms, and you got theory here, and we believe to be living in our theory. The visualization of this stuff here, the quote-unquote reality into which we process, the visualization of that is what I've shown here, and that's what you believe. That's what you believe to live in. Right? Simple explanation. I see your optical sensation, that's a qualia. You know, I process it into an expectation in the dark space, and I call it the expected touch space. That's the black space when you close your eyes. You close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes, and this is it, okay? Now, there is clearly a room around you. There is clearly a sensation that's associated with the source of the voice that you're hearing. This is an output of your model. You expect there to be sensation and so on, all right? Those things match together, and when I see you, I mean instantly. This happens within, you know, the 10th to 30th of a second that, you know, we normally react to, and you can experience this a lot. It's called the startle effect. If you suddenly see something that you didn't expect, like, for example, an experience that I've had would be, I walk along a hall at the university, every place is empty, the hall is empty, I walk around, there's a corner, I go around the corner, and I expect that hallway to be empty. Suddenly there's a jerk in me, right? So I have this vision of emptiness for just a fleeting second. You have to practice this, fleeting second. There's a jerk in me, you know, a startle. and somebody appears, all right? I've expected the future to be an empty hallway. I've been startled into very rapidly generating the expectation of an individual because that's what I see. So this is a constant interactive cycle like this here. And you are an event. To first approximation, and I'll go into that later on, but first approximation means that quantum theory, as people talk about it, is one, about the worst theory that exists, and two, it's at best, and has some very good things about it, but it is at best a first order approximation. By first order approximation, I mean it only works when the oscillations in space are so small that they do not destroy the space. All right, so now you're seeing space around you. When you see that space break apart and crash, all hell breaks loose, you're in trouble. Right? But that's what you are maintaining, and very delicate small oscillations in that space is what quantum mechanics does actually deal with. So there is a bigger theory, and the bigger theory is an event theory. Nevertheless, at first approximation, these cycles are very much identical to what Archibald Wheeler wrote the book on quantum measurement, and you should probably look him up because he wrote a very thick book where he collected individuals. And this U, where the universe is looking at itself, is sort of the symbol that is associated with him. So now you got 4, and in actuality, there's lots of them, lots of universes all looking at themselves, all explaining themselves to first approximation, not interacting. As you go to higher approximations, you start getting to what I believe is the network you were talking about, here in general, real physical terms. In other words, it is a network of interacting cognitive action cycles. The material of an event is action. The rate at which action is delivered to you or through you is energy. In psychological terms, action equates to happiness. The rate at which happiness is delivered is what we're after, and that's the amount in physics that is, and in all particles, that is minimized or extremized. Okay, so this is the universe, very similar to what we saw earlier in terms of a network, but now we've got some tangible things. These are action cycles, self-explanatory things that interact with other action cycles. All right? Now, once you accept this event-oriented world, a whole bunch of things become simple. Here's a list of them. This was part of a larger talk that I gave at the Jungian Institute down in Monterey. I'm only going to pick out this one area of being one with the universe, but it explains almost all of the psychological effects in physical terms. For physicists, which is for me, what it does is it extends quantum theory to a physical theory that I've called cognitive action theory. In other words, the material from which the cycle that you are built with, and when I'm talking about you, got to distinguish, right? There is the mechanism that you are, which is the whole cycle. Inside the mechanism is the sensation that you experience. Inside the sensation you experience is your body. I call that the little you. Okay, so there's the little you and there's the big you. This world around you, this guy in front of you, is your personal interpretation of the sensation that I'm trying to send. All right? All right, so being one with the universe means there's a choice. And this is, it's delicate coming to this place, but what it means is we have to move from an object-oriented world to an event-oriented world. If we stick with the objects, we end up with believing in a Ding an sich in German, the thing unto itself, an external world. We also get a grand high. I'm sure some of you have experienced it. I certainly have done my share at Berkeley in the 60s. And it's a terrific inspiration for art, for poetry, lots of wonderful magical feelings that we love to have. But it leaves us with a hard problem of consciousness. In other words, we can't really do much else except experience it and feel wonderful about it, which may be what most of us are involved in. But the event-oriented worldview means it's the event onto itself. And now I'm not trying to explain everything. I'm only trying to make a small step. And the step is objects to events. Then what you get there once you feel being one with the universe is the realization that the feeling is that you are experiencing the larger self. You are experiencing yourself. There is absolutely no way you can experience anything outside yourself. But outside yourself is not outside the little self. You are the space. You're experiencing the space. You are the entire cycle. You are a lifetime. And that lifetime exists always. That's your soul, your entire lifetime, of which a little piece of which is you. So there's a lot of work to be done here, and I want to advertise this a little bit because there's a call for papers on the unity of mind and brain. Nascent Systems is a company I own. Has given a $1,000 prize. It's going to be a special issue in quantum biosystems, and I suggest that if you know anybody who wants to participate in what I am hoping to be is just a collection of ideas for how to solve the mind-body problem, participate, and by next summer we might have a special session here for people and somebody is going to get a prize, or maybe several people. So let's go on. 5 minutes. Let's look at the conscious problem seriously. What creates conscious experience? So my suggestion is that it is a cognitive action cycle. To understand this, here's how it works. Mass, charge, separation energy inside the first person's material provides action patterns of experience which can be experienced only if one is the material itself. So what does that mean? What it means is that the reductionist theory says if I break something up, I'm going to finally get down to the essence of it. What I'm saying is no. If you break something up, you're still going to see the pieces from the outside. From the outside, you will see electromagnetic and gravitational influences. You will not see what's inside. What has been missing in physics is the fact that mass and charge, which are the sources of electromagnetic and gravitational influences, are themselves held together by a force. And that gives you an inside and it gives you an outside. The now time has an inside, which is what you're experiencing, and it has an outside, which is the external electromagnetic influences on the material and all material, which is always and only built of charges and mass. Okay? So now here is the flow of time, the stream of time. There's the apple, there's a charged mass on the surface of the apple. Here are the photons. They come into your retina. The retina is modeled as a set of arrays, detector arrays, that happen to have a separation of charge and mass because the universe outside that you can't see has charges that are pulled in one direction and masses that are pulled in the other direction. And internally, the forces that are pulling those apart are counterbalanced by forces that are pulling those together, and those are the cognitive forces inside of material. They're pulling them together in such a way that they completely balance the forces from the outside, which means that those forces provide a complete, total model of the outside world inside the charge-mass separation distances, and that's what it is that you're seeing as qualia. Right? So now let's go on. What happens? All right? Those retinal sensors produce the cognitive plane. This is what you actually see. This is on the outside that you can't see because you can't see it until you see it. Right? So it goes through internal cognitive processing. They then, in turn, the processing controls the charge mass separation from the inside. So now you're looking this way, right? The stream is coming toward you, it's coming through you. This stream is going through you. You're looking at it from this side, and now you're back looking at it from the outside. The previous one was your internal experience. Those internal experiences are processed to reproduce charge mass separations, which are sent out into the objective world, and that makes that internal outside cycle, which then means that our physics and our understanding of the world has to be augmented. It is not just charge and masses producing electricity and magnetism. It is a sequence, and you see that charge and mass produces a feeling, which produces an influence on charge and mass, which produces an influence on the outside world, and the thing goes along all the time, so that the actual process of causation is subjective, objective, subjective, objective, subjective, objective. And that is what that linear portion of the world looks like. Lots of them, all of us, moving through this sequence of objective, subjective, objective, subjective. And this is the alternative possibilities of how the architecture runs. If you are a cycle of these, then cognition occurs. You have to have a feedback loop. You have to be aware of yourself, in a sense. If you have linear, which means that you have boundary conditions that are linear, this thing is not cognitive because it's a piece of a larger cognitive system. So the universe that we normally as physical people deal with are these pieces. There's always a past and a future. We ourselves aren't pieces. We are cycles, cycles of explanation and self-measurement. This is, let me just finish with because I'm done. All right. So this is the single action loop. All right. Here's a gravitational field down around. That's inside this thing is where the memory holds, and this is the explanation section. Influences go around like this, and you notice here mass influences mass, charge influences charge. In the internal part, charge influences mass, and mass influences charge. So there's four forces. All right. Putting that together, this is the universe, slightly different than before, but now you can see the structure, the architecture of a personal being. He's got an external set of interfaces, an internal cycle that matches, and inside where these two counter merge, that's where cognitive experience happens. This projects that model now into a second person's brain. All right? Past influences the retina, processed toward an experience of qualia, generated around through the model to produce an explanation, visualization of that qualia, meaning the feeling that you have that something is real, that's still there when you close your eyes, right? Which then goes out to produce outside forces, gravitation, inertia, and electricity and magnetism. When you feel one with the universe, you are feeling one with yourself. You are experiencing the larger you, the entire mechanism of yourself. That's what's happening. You're not seeing the outside world, if there is such a thing. You have no way of doing that. All you can do is experience internally what's happening inside yourself. One of the things that happens inside yourself is that you build an explanation of the influences out there that come in, and that explanation is built in the vocabulary of objects, you know, in our Western world. So that's the thing. So the feeling of being one with the universe happens because the experience of the universe, one truly believes, so it's the belief that you're experiencing, is real. That's a real feeling. But it's actually an internal display of your accommodation to external influences which are superimposed on the feeling of the reality structure of your brain. If you have no influences from the outside and you're isolated, your experience of the brain will be an empty nirvana state. Right? So on top of that state, you project all the objects that you see. So this is the inside. And here are three references. Unity of mind, brain, and the world. That's where the unity thing comes from. It's a book. I have a chapter 4 in it. This is Deepak Chopra's book, the last one, Mind, Brain, and Cosmo, and I have chapter 1 in that that explains this. The best is a free thing that you can get, and it's this one, Force of Consciousness in Mass Charge Interaction. This explains basically the entire theory in a very short period of time. And I'll leave this up because the last one is just so. Is there time for questions? 4 minutes. Yes.
If I'm hearing you correctly, you're proposing a new fundamental force?
Correct. Well, the physicists have...
The internal cognitive force?
Right. The physicists have interpreted those as quarks and, you know, internal to material. I've short-circuited an entire thing. And I've simply said, hey, all we can see from the outside, everything that we know about comes to us through gravitation and electricity and magnetism. All the other stuff is imagination. So I'm going to imagine something a lot simpler than having to go to CERN and spend your whole life trying to do it. I'm going to say, look, there's charge and mass. What holds them together? Let me postulate two forces. Then from the distance separation, I can calculate the energy. I can calculate an energy pattern, and that corresponds directly to what you see, your quality.
So the other two forces that are generally considered fundamental forces.
Weak and strong force, yeah.
You can sort of formalize your way out from needing them, so to speak?
Correct. Right. And it's simple. You take the Bohr atom, which assumes that charge and mass are together and it's floating around, and you simply say, hey, that is a configuration, a cyclic configuration. It's not a thing moving around, it's just a structure. And when it's influenced from the outside, it can either change its structure to some eigenvalue of its structure, which has to satisfy certain forces, and the forces are that things only appear where all the forces are zero. That's the most fundamental statement in physics. I've simply added the internal forces to it. So it's called the extended Dalembert principle. All right. Yes?
Can you step back? There was a, I didn't catch the link to that conference that you can be having, that prize thing.
Oh, well, first, you mean that?
Yeah.
All right. You know, look up my name, Wolfgang Baer, consciousness, yeah. Wolfgang Baer, reality model, something like that. All this stuff will come up. I mean, it's, you know, it's not hard. But if you go to these websites, this is the Quantum Biosystems Journal, and this is Nascent Systems homepage, and there'll be an announcement, you know, for it, and spread it along. What we're looking for is we're trying to drag a net through everybody's ideas and say, hey, you know, the time's come to stop beating around the bush. Mind-body problem is here. Let's see what is out there to solve it. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of which, I'm curious what Deepak thinks of your ideas, because I know he is pretty firmly in the Hindu tradition of Brahmanic experience and, you know, true moksha, etc. And you're saying it's essentially an illusion. But I think you're being...
No, well, no, I'm not, I'm saying it's an illusion if you believe that that's the reality. It's a real sensation, but...
But he wouldn't agree with that. He would say it's a real thing.
Right, but I think he would also say that illusions are real, you know, feelings are real, and so on and so forth. I had a lot of conversations with him. He made my chapter on this topic, chapter 1 in his latest book, you know, the Sages and Sciences, so that tells you something.
Yeah.
I've been involved in quite a few conversations. I think the guy is right on, except for the fact that I am not interested, frankly, sorry for, I'm not interested in being going back to the Hindu traditions or anything like that. I'm very interested in taking current knowledge, you know. I want to take everything with me, you know. I want my armor to come along. I don't want to, you know, so I want to take science and move it forward so it will incorporate those traditions. You know, I don't want to see this fighting between this is right and this is wrong. They're both wrong, and we need to develop something that incorporates both of them. And the event concept is the smallest step that I can produce that has a chance of doing that integration. Because an event contains both the subject and the object in this formulation, and therefore it depends on which way you look at it. So it's two sides, you know, the subject and object are two sides of the same coin, so to speak. And I think that's what everybody's talking about in terms of, so think in terms of events. Yeah.
Actually, I think I like it the way you have presented it, because that comes kind of like into the Hindu or the Eastern philosophy of you know, that everything that's out there is illusion, but in reality we're here. That's how we experience all these things, events, so
Right.
you not put it as, and we evolve accordingly, and to attain and to come to that realization state where you say, hey, this is all, in a way it's illusion, but this is how we experience our what we're evolving. So
Right.
just
I mean, I'm no expert in Eastern philosophies, but from what I do know is this is very, very similar, and that's why I get along with Deepak quite well. The difference is that, you know, I want to mathematize it. I want to build formulas. I want to build stuff. I don't just want to talk about feeling good. I want to build stuff, and I need the tools to do it.
Yeah, I see exactly where you're coming from.
Yes.
Do you have a book or something that puts all this together?
This is basically a work in progress. That's why I, you know, said the things. These are this is fairly extensive, but you know, these are the references that contain the main possibilities. I do have one other chapter called The Introduction to the Physics of Consciousness. It was published in the Journal of Consciousness Studies, fairly reputable journal in this area, about, I think in 2011 or something like that. I can't remember, but it's called The Introduction to the Physics of Consciousness. And it goes into this stuff, but at a higher abstract level. From that point on, I've actually developed you know, tangible physical theories that, from event theory, you can derive quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics, the separation between charge and mass is the tangible wave function. You know, it's our retina and the oscillations in our retina that are the wave function that generates the quantum mechanical processes. The Hilbert space is nothing more than implemented as a detector array, a retina. That is a Hilbert, that's the physical Hilbert space. If you go to the books, they always say, oh, it's an abstract mathematical thing. No way. It is the detectors, arrays that we use to measure stuff.
You feel like that is the Hilbert space?
That is the implementation of the Hilbert space. The H and so on that they talk about, that's the symbol of that implementation. But it's always the detector arrays that define the thing that you're looking at. So you got the detector arrays, you got the supposed thing that you're looking at, And behind the detector rays, you have the interpretation of what you think you're seeing, which then is a projection back into,
Right,
right?
that interacts with it.
Right, and that's where the cycle comes in.